Hello and welcome to Make a Memory Bear. Today we're making Noelle the mini memory bear. This is a tiny little bear that's only about 8 inches tall. If you click on the description box below, there is a link to purchase the pattern. It will take you over to my Etsy shop. And once you have purchased it, Etsy immediately sends the pattern to you in an email where you can download it and print it, which is step number 1. Other supplies that you're going to need to complete this project are going to be a sewing machine. However, this is not required. You can do it by hand if you would prefer. You will also need some matching thread, a needle, scissors, pins, and a seam ripper is optional. For this bear, you're going to need one small bag of stuffing. I think the smallest bag is actually 12 ounces. And then I prefer to use safety eyes and a nose because that's safest for children. I use 12 millimeter eyes and a 17 millimeter nose. You'll need about 1/3 of a yard of fabric. I like to use clothing from a loved one who has passed away or from children who have grown up and can no longer fit into their littler clothes, but you'll need about 1/3 of a yard total. You can either use one fabric throughout the entire thing, or you can use 2 different fabrics like I'm going to today just to add some interest to the bear. So I chose 2 different shirts from a grandma, but you can also make this entire bear out of a fuzzy material like one of these that I've got. You can also use a fuzzy material like this just as an accent. Just mix and match your fabrics as you see fit. Dress shirts like this, like a men's button-up shirt, tend to be my favorite fabric to work with. I also like working with little baby receiving blankets and with flannels. Any type of cotton is best. If you are a beginner, I am going to highly recommend that you choose some sort of fabric that is solid, like this solid blue one I've got here. Stripes and plaids are going to be harder to line those up. Also, it's easiest if you find a shirt that is the same on the inside and the outside. If you see this one, there's a clear right side and wrong side. That's going to be a little bit more challenging if you're brand new. So if at all possible, choose a fabric more like this blue shirt that's the same on the inside and the out. It won't be as confusing, less room for error. If you do have a fabric that is like this little baby's onesie, these little sleepers, these are super stretchy. Or if you have an old t-shirt or an old sweatshirt that just has a lot of stretch to it, I highly recommend that you get an iron-on stabilizer, which is something you iron onto the fabric first, and that's going to give it a lot more stiffness and sturdiness before you start sewing. So step 1 is to print out your pattern, and then we're going to be cutting it out on the solid line. There's actually only 2 pieces to this pattern, which is, again, excellent for beginners. But you're going to notice it says cut to 1 reverse. What that means is we're going to be cutting this pattern piece out 2 times. The first one we're going to cut out the regular way, and then we're going to reverse it. We're going to flip it over, and we're going to cut one out the opposite direction. So the easiest option is if you have a fabric that is the same on the inside and the outside, there's no clear right side or wrong side, you could just double up your fabric, set your pattern piece down, and when you cut it out just one time, it will automatically make 1 forward and 1 reverse, and you only have to cut once. So you would do that for the front piece, pin it, cut it out, do the exact same thing for the back piece. As long as your fabric is doubled up, you just make 1 cut. That is going to be your easiest option by far. Now, your second easiest option is if you choose a fabric that has a right side and a wrong side, like this, one side's fuzzy, one side's not, but there's no clear pattern or design. There's not like stripes that you have to line up or anything like that. With this kind of fabric, you can just double it up, fold it up so that the right sides are touching. You lay your pattern pieces on, you pin them in place, and then you cut them out. That way you would automatically have one facing forward, and then you have the opposite one will be facing the reverse way. So that would be our second easiest option. Now another way that you can cut this out, if you have a fabric, like one of the shirts I'm using today that has a clear right side and a clear wrong side, what you could do is just take one single layer of fabric and, like, here, let me unbutton this and show you what I'm talking about. If you just had a single sheet of fabric, you could take the pattern piece, you could cut it out one time, this direction, the right way, and then you would find another spot on that material, flip it over, and you could cut it out a second time. So that is an option for you as well. You would just repeat on the back. Today I'm going to show you how to do the hardest option. This is where you use two different fabrics to make more of a patchwork bear. So I'll be using this flowered fabric and the polka dotted one. And the way that we're going to do this, or the way that I want it to be, is where one half of the front of the bear is going to be the polka dots, the other half of the front is going to be the flower, and the same on the back. So let me show you how we're going to cut this out. So first I'm going to take my two shirts, I'm going to open them up, I'm going to lay them flat so that their right sides are touching. So here I've got the flowers facing up, that's the right side. I'm going to take the polka dots, I'm going to lay it on top of the flowers so that the polka dots are touching the flowers, so the right sides are together. I'm going to smooth this out so that I have enough room for my two pattern pieces. And then I'm going to take both pattern pieces and I'm going to lay them so that the arms and the legs are going in the same direction. So the front of my pattern is going the regular way, but the back side, I have to flip it so it's upside down. But as long as the arms and legs are going the same direction, that will give us that patchwork effect when we're done. Next, I'm going to pin the pattern pieces onto the fabric. And then we cut it out. So this is what it should look like at this stage of the game. Before we move on, however, I want to let you know that if you ever have a piece of fabric that is too tiny, like if you've got little bitty baby clothes and this pattern piece won't fit on there, you can cut this pattern apart to break it down into smaller pieces. For example, you can cut this ear off from corner to corner here. Just go kind of follow the line. You can cut the arms off going from like top to bottom of that arm piece. You can kind of figure it out. Just cut all these pieces off at the joints, and that will make much smaller pattern pieces. You can even cut the head off right at the neck, straight across. And it's going to give you much smaller pieces to work with, so you can put it onto little tiny baby clothes. And then once you cut all of your fabric pieces out, you're going to put it back together just like a puzzle. So then you would just sew it all back together so that you have this one piece again. And that's where we are right now. You would just jump ahead to the next step. So that is an option for you if you've got little tiny baby clothes or something very tiny. You can also use this if you really want to make a patchwork look and you want lots of different fabrics. Like say you're making a scrap bear, you can make a whole bunch of fabrics for each piece of this pattern. So let's start with the front of the bear. I'm going to place my pattern pieces so that the right sides of the fabric are up, and we're going to start with this little bitty dart here. So I'm going to take the foot of the bear, I'm going to fold it over towards the belly, and then I'm going to place some pins right on that little dart. We're going to sew right there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other piece of fabric. I'm going to take the foot, fold it over towards the belly. I'm going to put a couple pins to hold it in place, and then we're going to sew right along that little dart. Now that we have those darts sewn on both of the front pieces, we're going to place them with the right sides of the fabric touching again, and we're going to pin and sew right along that front edge of the body, like where the face and the belly are. Next, we're going to work on the back of the bear. The back is the one that has these two little triangles. These are the indicators that tell you where you do not want to sew between the triangles, because that's going to create a stuffing hole so that we can stuff the bear when we're finished. So again, I'm going to be separating these into two single pieces, and just like on the front of the bear, we need to work on the little dart first. So this time I'm going to grab the side with the triangles. I'm going to fold that in on itself, and then I'm going to pin right along the little dart. And again, repeat the process on the other pattern piece. And then just sew that dart just like we did on the front pieces. So now we have our darts sewn on both of the back pieces. I'm going to place the pattern pieces on top of one another with the right sides together, and I'm going to pin it in place. Don't forget that those two triangle notches are indicators of where you do not want to sew between, because that needs to be left as a hole so we can stuff the bear later. So what I often do is take a pin and stick it in the opposite way, so that it kind of reminds me as I'm sewing along not to sew between there, so that I can leave a hole. So once you're done sewing the back and you snip off these extra threads, you might want to just double check, make sure you've got that stuffing hole. There it is. And this is what the back of your bear should look like at this point. Okay, so now we have the back done, we've got the front done. If you did this complicated version like me, you might be saying, uh-oh, Amy, you did it wrong. But no, this is how it should be looking at this point, because when we place these pieces right side together, you'll notice that now we have it exactly how it should be, where the polka dots are matched up with the flowers, the polka dots are matched up with the flowers, and once we sew it all together, it's going to give that patchwork kind of effect to the bear. So now we're ready to pin the front and the back pieces together. I like to start right up at the top where this seam is, because I want that to be matched up. So I'm going to be starting there. I'm going to put pins all the way around. It's also important that the bottom of the bear, that center seam matches up perfectly. So just take your time, use as many pins as you need to, and pin the entire perimeter. This is what your bear should look like at this point once you've put the pins in. I do want to say one thing about the toe of this bear. We've got a dart that's right at the top of the foot here, and we're going to be sewing this dart in our next step. So when you're sewing along, go around the entire perimeter, and once you get to that dart, stop, pick up, and start on the other side of the dart, and then continue. We're going to sew this dart in our next step. So now we're ready to sew along this entire perimeter of the bear, and this takes a moment, so take your time, go nice and slowly. I like to start right up at the top of the head, and when I'm sewing along, when I get to any of these really abrupt angles, like right here at the ear, I pick up my footer, I readjust my pattern so that I can keep that a nice clean angle so it doesn't get too rounded. And here's where I'm approaching the dart on the toe of the foot. So again, I'm going to sew right up to that edge of the dart. I'm going to kind of go back and forth to reinforce that toe a little bit. Then I'm going to pick up my footer. I'm going to readjust it so that it's on the other side of that dart. Start sewing again. Reinforce it a little bit with a bit of back and forth. And then I'll continue on. And when we're done, then I'll just snip that thread that's across the dart so that we can move on to our next step. Now that I sewed the entire perimeter, I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to clip those threads that I left right there at the dart, and we're ready to actually sew the dart next. Next, we're going to take our fabric and we're going to pull it apart right there at that toe. And we want to make sure that the seam is matched up on top and bottom, and we're going to be pinning this in place so that we're going to create a new line that we're going to be sewing across. So put a couple of pins in, and then to help this toe lay flat, it's best if you can open up the existing seam. Just kind of fold it over to the sides on the top and on the bottom, and then stick your pin in place. Now this step isn't crucial, so if your seam got a little bit tiny when you were sewing the perimeter, it's fine. Just pin it the best that you can, but if you can lay those seams flat, it will help the overall appearance when we're all done. But once you get all of your pins into place, then we'll have a new line that we just want to sew straight across. Whoop, right there. Here's where we are now. The entire thing is sewn together. We've got our little toes on each of our feet. And according to the pattern, the next step is to turn the bear right side out. But before we do that, I am going to recommend that you make a couple of very important cuts just to help this thing lay flatter when we open it up. So I take my scissors, and anywhere that we made those really sharp angles, like right here at the neck, I'm going to put a little slit there. But I want to make sure that I don't cut through my thread. So I'm going to do that on each side of the bear's neck. And then also anywhere, like I said, there's a joint that's a sharp angle. So right here at the leg, where it kind of attaches to the belly, I'm going to put some little slits there. And also anywhere that there's a pretty severe curve, I'm going to cut some little slits there as well. So for example, here at the ear, I'm going to put all these little tiny clips all around the edge of the ear, making sure not to cut through my thread that I sewed. And when we turn this right side out, it's going to help those curvy parts open up and lay a little bit flatter. So do that first before we move on to turning it right side out. To turn it right side out, we're going to find that stuffing hole in the back of the bear, and we're just going to flip it right side out. Now, some of these pattern pieces, especially like the arms, they're kind of tiny. So if you're having trouble flipping those right side out, I'd recommend taking something like a pencil and use the eraser end, and that'll help you kind of turn those pieces out and stretch the arms out the way they're supposed to look. It should look something like this when you're done. For this bear, for the eyes, I like to use safety eyes that are 12 millimeters and a nose that is 17 millimeters. I highly recommend using safety eyes and noses only if this is going to be for a child or if a child can access it. I usually buy my eyes and noses on Etsy, just with whatever seller has the best price. You can also get it at many craft stores like Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabrics if you go to the doll making department. Now, what I would recommend is just laying the pattern kind of flat so that the face is right up next to it, the sides are right on top of each other. Then you can take your pattern piece, kind of roughly put it in the right spot, and you can use the indicator where I put the eyes on the bear, or you can put it just wherever you want. But I take my seam ripper and right through the pattern and right through both sides of the fabric, I stick my seam ripper through and I make a teeny weeny little bitty starter hole. You do not want to make this too big. If you make it too big, then it's going to create a big tear and your eye could pop right through. So this is just a teeny weeny little starter hole just to give you an idea of where to stick the eye. And by doing it with this technique, it ensures that it's going to be in the same spot on both sides of the face. If you try to do it one at a time, it's real easy to get crooked eyes or get them a little bit lopsided. So once you stick it through your little starter hole, of course, you just pop on the safety back. If you are not making this for a child, or if it's going to be high up on a shelf and you know no children are ever going to have access to it, you could also use just regular buttons. Like my shirts had buttons that came with them, so it would be cute to use one of those coordinating ones to put the eyes and nose on. You could also embroider these. Just get some black embroidery floss and you could sew your own little eyes and nose on, and that would be actually even safer than the safety eyes and nose if this is for a little bitty child. I do the same technique for the nose, so that I grab my pattern piece and put it up against the side of the head of the bear to roughly get an idea of where the nose should go. But again, I promise this is your bear. You put it wherever you want to. Whatever looks good to you, put it there. Now, with this nose, I want to say something real quick before I put my starter hole in. Do not put the hole right in the seam. If you put your hole right there, you're actually cutting your thread and then the whole thing's going to unravel. So you want to put a teeny weeny little tiny starter hole right next to the seam. And once you get the safety nose in place and locked down, you can straighten it out so that it looks like it's actually directly in the center, but it really needs to be off either to the left or to the right by just a little smidgen so that you don't tear that seam. We're ready to do the ears next. You're going to be going through the stuffing hole in the back of the bear, and you're going to grab a pinch of stuffing and stick it into each ear. Now you can use as much or as little stuffing as you wish. You can make them firm ears or you can make them really squishy ears, your choice. Once your stuffing is in there, we're going to be sewing a little seam right along the base of the ear. So just try to line the ear up in your sewing machine so that you start at one edge and you sew straight across right over to the other edge. And repeat on the other side. Moving on to the legs, we're going to add stuffing through the stuffing hole into the foot of the bear. And what I recommend is that you can put a lot of stuffing right up at the toe and the heel of the bear, like on the foot of the bear. But we are going to be sewing a seam at the crease of the leg where it meets the body. So you don't want to put as much stuffing right up at the base of the leg by the belly. So put as much in or as little in as you desire to get the firmness that you want. But then right up where it comes next to the body, I would leave it a little bit looser just so it flops nice and easily once the bear is finished. Okay, so now we've got both legs stuffed as firm or as squishy as we want them, and we're going to be sewing along the front side of the bear. We've got those little darts that we sewed a couple of steps ago, and we're going to use that as a guide. We're going to start at the bottom, we're going to sew straight up to where the leg meets the belly, where we did one of those angles. So use your dart as a guide, just sew straight up along the leg. I do want to point out, on the back of the bear, we also have little darts, but that's just to make a bum for the bear. The darts on the back have nothing to do with the darts on the front. They will not line up with each other, and that's fine. That's the way it's supposed to be. So just use the front dart as your guide. Lay this down as flat as you can get it in your sewing machine, and we're just going to sew straight from the bottom of the bear straight up his leg, using the dart as a rough guide. And you can kind of squish all the stuffing up towards the toe of the bear. We can rearrange the stuffing once we're done. And I'm just pulling and flattening and straightening this fabric as much as I can as I sew that straight seam. Okay, legs are stuffed and done. We're going to move on to the little arms. Because they are so narrow, this might be, again, a time that you want to grab like a pencil and use the eraser end to help you get the stuffing all the way to the hand of the arms. But just get it in there. Again, you're going to want to put more stuffing towards the hand and less stuffing where the arm connects to the body, since we will be sewing that seam. And we'll be sewing a straight line from the top of the arm where it meets the neck straight down to like the armpit area. We're getting to the home stretch, folks. Now we're ready to stuff the head of the bear next. And I, personal preference, like to put a lot of stuffing into the head just to give it a lot of structure so that it's not too squishy and floppy. While you're stuffing the head, though, this is when you want to make sure that all your little safety eyes and noses are in the right spot and that they're laying flat. So position it if you need to, so that it's in line with that center seam. And then as soon as you're done with the head, you just move on to the belly. This is where I sometimes make these bellies a little bit more squishy by using less stuffing. So just fill it to your heart's content. And this is not an exact science, so I just keep sitting my bear up, looking at it, feeling it, getting it until it's just how I like it, with the right amount of stuffing, and so that it kind of sits up okay. And then our final step is going to be to sew up this stuffing hole. So make sure you really like it before you close it up. I recommend using a ladder stitch to close your stuffing hole. And there's some really good tutorials on YouTube that show you up close and step by step how to do a ladder stitch. I'll link one of those tutorials in the description box below in case you need a closer view of how to do this. And once it's sewn closed, just go ahead and take a moment to disperse the stuffing and make sure it's all squishy and where you want it to be. And then the final step is just to accessorize this bear and put the finishing touches on it. So you could add little bows to it, either as like a little bow tie if it's a boy bear, or put a bow in its hair up by the top of its head or by its ears. You could put a bow around its neck, like I'm going to be doing today. You could add patches to it if you wanted to put some sort of iron-on patch onto your little bear. Whatever you want to do, this is your chance to really make it unique, customize it, add any flair that you want to really make this special and customized. So here's the final product, Noelle the Mini Memory Bear, a tiny little 8-inch bear that packs a lot of punch though. So enjoy making your bear. I hope it brings you or somebody that you know a lot of love, peace, and comfort. Thanks so much for watching.